So this is from my January essay, Why Circus? Connecting Movement Teaching to Cultural Change. I experienced two distinct forms of learning. In one of those forms, someone articulates something that I've already understood, and this type of learning feels like relief. I finally have the language that I need to express and fully understand something that I feel like I already knew. The second kind of learning that I experience feels more like discovery. Someone says or does something that feels fundamentally new or connects to things that I'd never really connected before. This type of learning is like deeply exciting and sometimes uncomfortable, sometimes it's scary, but it always involves some fundamental shift in my sense of the world and how I believed things worked or connected. Both of these different types of learning, both the better articulation of something I knew and the something fundamentally different, occurred for me when I was reading the book My Grandmother's Hands a couple years ago. The articulations of how racial prejudice lives in the body, the exercises that are spaced throughout the book, and like the book's clear desire to begin the work of untangling race in an embodied way, all really felt deeply relieving to me. It felt like it was uncovering some knowledge that already existed, but was somehow like unarticulated and therefore not fully understood. The thing about the book that felt really new to me was the idea that a book that just words on a page could effect this kind of embodied change, could like work its magic so strongly that my body in a totally different space at a totally different time could be fundamentally changed. The way my body reacted to black bodies, the way my body reacted to police bodies, the way my body reacted to thinking about my ancestors. All of these things were changed for me in my body by that book and convinced me of something kind of new or that I'd never experienced before, was that a body can be changed through writing. I had a really similar learning experience during my master's research with my supervisor, Dr. Dean Krelars. He's a neuroscientist turned health and movement researcher, and he works primarily in physical literacy, which is a field that frames movement and our embodiment as integral to our experience of the world and inseparable from our psychological, social, and physical environments. We were one day in class reviewing the physical literacy engine and relating it to community and community building. He connected this process of building individual physical literacy, building our embodied sense of how we move through the world and how we perceive opportunities and how we perceive other people in the world, to building social equity. And he did this by pointing out that social skills and individual psychological features like ability to trust in others, ability to solve conflict, that these skills were inseparable from our embodied experience and were therefore a really critical part of the development of physical literacy and the reason that physical literacy needs to be developed in community. This just kind of exploded my brain and connected some new things for me, because I said, here's that idea again. The idea that when our bodies relate to each other in physical space, or when our bodies relate to each other across internet space, when we move together, we're syncing up. The idea that all of us humans are just bodies in space is somehow key to social equity. Now, I don't say this to shift the responsibility for social equity onto an individual. Rather, my point is that systemic change is impossible or ineffectual. What I mean by impossible is that without the development of physical literacy, we can't muster the social cohesion necessary to radically alter systems of oppression. Or ineffectual, that even if we alter the systems, if we haven't done the work on an individual embodied level, then those alterations of the system are ineffectual. We see this in, for example, de facto discrimination or segregation, in places where segregation is technically now illegal in the United States. But we don't actually see that. That hasn't actually happened because the embodied change that needs to change hasn't occurred. So both things move together, right? Without this change in our perceptions and our actions as they relate to our immediate physical and social environments, any systemic changes we make don't actually change the day-to-day lives of people, and vice versa. That no matter how much social or physical change we make in our immediate space, our systems won't reflect it unless we try to change the systems, but that these two things are deeply intertwined with each other. When it comes to the development of physical literacy in this way, there is something really important here about my attraction to circus education. Not circus performance, but circus education. Because for me, circus education teaches us a few things that I think are critical for our experience of our immediate social and physical environments. First, circus teaches our bodies that things that seem impossible can be achieved. Second, circus teaches us how risks can be managed and how to manage our fear and our anxiety, how we can regulate our fear and our anxiety. Third, circus teaches us to trust other bodies with our physical and emotional safety. And finally, circus teaches us that variability is more important than getting it right. And to me, circus feels really unique in these teachings. As much as I love and grew up in theater education, theater is a little too concerned with playing pretend to teach our bodies about the actual impossible. Pretending to do the impossible isn't the same as actually learning to do it. Pretending to be a part in a play isn't actually the same as being that part in your real life. There's a little too much playing pretend in theater for it to accomplish the same things that that circus can accomplish. As much respect as I have for dance education doesn't put us face to face with our fear, and sometimes dance education can be oriented a little too much around aesthetics rather than execution. Now, I don't say this to make the case that circus is somehow better than theater or dance for education. I don't actually believe that. But I do believe that circus is critically different than theater or dance education, and that distinction I think is actually fairly important. I've discovered that my interest in circus or circus education only extends as far as circus aligns with these teachings. As various disciplines of circus enter the mainstream, these teachings, these important teachings, get diluted by the overpowering mass of people who are participating in that circus discipline. And as that happens, my interest in the disciplines of circus itself actually begins to diminish. Most especially, I see this fourth lesson, that circus is about variability rather than getting it right. I see this lesson beginning to fade. My interest in circus is not about the imitation of other people's skill, but in an individual's journey towards embodiment and the individual quest for something that seems impossible, for potential movement, for accomplishing something you never thought you could accomplish before, actually with your body in real space with real people watching. If circus is going to effect social change the way that I think it can, it will be through the mechanism of teaching enough bodies that something that seems impossible, a future filled with equity and justice and climate change, for example, is indeed achievable. We need to convince bodies, we need to embody impossible seeming experiences over and over and over again in order to convince people's bodies, in order to convince enough bodies that things that seem impossible are actually achievable. Up until this point in this essay, I've been intentionally limiting my scope to talking about circus education rather than talking about circus performance. But it is important to acknowledge that the mainstreaming effect that I'm seeing in education relates to live circus performance, like seeing a show, or online circus performance, like scrolling every day on Instagram. Anyone who started teaching or performing in circus let's say, 2014 or so, has seen the incredible impact that YouTube and Instagram and the internet have had specifically on circus performance and on circus education. And while not all of the impacts of these things are negative, a lot of those impacts are. Pre-Instagram, if you were an isolated aerialist, you had to actually engage and learn about your apparatus and invent new material. A process which led to a journey of personal discovery about what your body could achieve with your apparatus. Today, that's not the case. A bored or isolated aerialist only has to search a hashtag online and then enters into a process of imitation, which I believe is much less fruitful and can be much more discouraging for diverse body types, diverse skill sets, etc., even as it is less taxing on your brain and your body, even as it has increased access to circus disciplines for the world. Now, I'm not suggesting that we try to turn back the clock or put YouTube or Instagram back into the closet or anything. I don't think that's possible, nor am I trying to kind of like claim that the good old days were like so good and old and amazing, right? Rather, I am trying to lay some responsibility on circus educators, on myself, on other circus educators, for allowing this transition to happen and for participating in it so easily. I don't mean participating in teaching online. Obviously, I'm teaching online now. Everyone teaches online. This isn't the problem. The problem came from codifying the techniques of circus to create access, instead of resisting the urge for codification and resisting the urge to make everything easier for our students. Rather than resisting that urge, we leaned into that urge. And in doing that, in our eagerness to make a living and to reveal that circus discipline was, in fact, more accessible than it appeared, we adopted some of the rigid and hierarchical forms of education used by dance and theater and left behind some of the most unique aspects of circus education. Given that my interest in circus is grounded in this process of discovery and especially of disobedience, of a gentle rebellion against norms, of a gentle rebellion against even the idea of technique, and in a deep commitment to helping students tap into their universal humanity by delving into the specificity of their body and its capabilities. Showing people tricks to do a handstand, showing people drills to do a handstand, showing people the latest thing on fabric does nothing to forward this agenda. And the more imitative circus becomes, the less I'm interested in it. The light I see at the end of the tunnel here is that I think we will always be drawn toward edges and fringes. I think we will always be searching for something open-ended and new. For me, this first essay is a call to action for other circus coaches, to resist the pull towards imitation, to resist the pull of making all the techniques easy and structured. Lean towards the harder, longer path of teaching your students invention. Grow towards the unknown and towards the uncomfortable disruption of the imitative status quo. Because that is where we need to spend our time as educators if we want our students to embody the disruption that the world needs to move towards cultural change and equity.